Hello, hello. Nice to have you with us once again. A very serious issue at the moment. There's news out that 62% of the farms in America are drought-stricken at this stage, bearing in mind that about 40% of their produce, and I'm talking here specifically about maize and soybeans, is exported to places like Africa. Where does this leave us as Africans from a food security point of view? Omri van Zyl is leader of the agribusiness unit at Deloitte. He's with us in the studio this evening. And joining us from our bureau in Cape Town is Gareth Lloyd-Jones, who's the MD of EcoWise. Gareth, let's start with you. Are you guys concerned about these facts? I'm sure you must be.
No, absolutely. I think it indicates a significantly serious situation, not only opposite the consumer in the short to medium term, but I think in terms of how we manage our food supply chain in Africa and in South Africa going forward from a food security point of view.
Omri, my understanding of this, though, is twofold. There's the supply issue, but even more important is the distribution issue, because even if we didn't have the droughts in America and Russia, they can grow as much as they want to. It's actually getting it to where it's needed that is also one of the major issues here.
Yes, that's right, Jeremy. A lot of people they see a bread on their table, but they don't really value the origins of that specific loaf of bread. The reality is, the whole supply chain is under pressure at the moment in the States. I mean, prices have risen just on maize by 50%. Soybeans normally follow the trend, and they're sitting at about 25% up. So for example, if you have to feed animals, the primary source of food for animals in the States is fodder, coming from maize, or corn as they call it. And that is also under pressure. So they've dived into their stockpiles, and the net effect of that is that the supply and demand curve for maize is out. That drives prices up, and it puts all the exporting countries, or the countries that they export the most to, under a lot of pressure. You're looking at countries like Guatemala and Belize and Peru that are really going to struggle as a consequence of that situation.
Are we addressing that, Gareth, from a South African point of view? I mean, when we talk about food security as South Africa,
if you look at the DuPont's rating on that particular issue, it indicates that we are actually not as secure as we would like to be. From my perspective, one of the key issues that I believe government needs to address is to look at our agricultural sector and understand that sector actually represents the future of our country and our economy, as opposed to being the past. There's well-documented research and evidence of how developed nations have actually built their economies on the back of a well-developed agricultural sector that provides and fuels the economy, excuse the pun, but it fuels the economy into the industrialized situation. If one looks at the current situation in Africa and in South Africa, there are large gaps in how that agricultural sector actually supports itself. Not only from a food security point of view, but from an environmental sustainability point of view and from a rural development point of view. And all of these questions need to be answered, and can be answered in the wake of the situation we find ourselves in terms of a well thought out and well-structured multi-party, multi-stakeholder development program aimed at providing our continent with a secure and relevant food supply, or food security, as we would put it, going forward into the future.
Okay, I'm going to then play the part of the I'm allowed to do that because it's my show. I can do what I want to, you see. So I'm going to now appoint both of you. And I want, Omri, I want your answer first, and then Gareth, I'll come to you. Because you're in Cape Town, we'll give you a bit more time to think your way through this one. But
thanks.
I'm going to throw this at you. Here's the scenario. I have now made you the head of the SADC Agricultural Ministry, which I've just started. Its job is to look at and develop agriculture through the SADC countries and develop that. What would your single most important thing be that you would institute in the SADC region to ensure that there is food security for the region?
I think it's very important as the head of this unit.
Yes, you see, he's already buying into this. I like it.
Thank you.
Yeah.
As the head of this unit, I would institute a body that would form a kind of a hub, right? The issue is that in Africa, the investment opportunities and the investors are not always connected to each other. And a lot of these investors don't understand the realities of farming in Africa. So I would create a hub that would function as a conduit for governments, private sector, private equity investors, farmers, and this hub will be based on a commercial model that needs to drive policy in countries, needs to drive land acquisitions, needs to facilitate big transactions to ensure that land is properly developed and cultivated, and that food security is measured, because nobody in Africa and Southern Africa really measures where we are on the scale, that it's properly measured, and that measures or different interventions are implemented to curb the risk of running into a hunger situation or a situation where food security becomes a crisis.
Okay. Spoken like a true politician, because you will notice the first thing Omri suggested is, as a politician, he would start a committee. That's what they all do. It's the first thing they do. Now, Gareth, what would you do in that position?
Well, obviously there would need to be some sort of committee structure, to support that notion. But I think what is fundamentally going to be key is to decide on what is it that we actually want as a continent. But one of the sort of temptations is to say, well, what can this continent be good at? And then let's exploit that, and then turn it into a global commodity and push it into the market from an exporting point of view, and creating jobs and creating economically sustainable sort of product and work and whatnot for the various parties involved. But I think the very first thing that I would tend to do would be to look at your rural areas, and I believe that the small farmer in those rural areas is actually the answer. And we need to address how we're going to incorporate those small farmers and move them from a subsistence level into a semi-commercialized level that provide the sort of food and the security of that food into a supply chain, into a quasi-industrialized setup that provides food for the continent first. Once we get that right, once we've secured food for the continent, then we should look at obviously the more industrial measures. But I believe that if we tackle it from a small farmer upwards, we will have a much more sustainable situation going into the future of the continent.
It's interesting that you raise that particular issue with small farmers, because the last show we were doing was on franchising, and one of the things that came up in that was the opportunity, future franchise opportunities in South Africa. And this was exactly one of those opportunities, was agriculture, where you get a franchisor who buys in the seed, for example, and the insecticides. And he has franchisees who are growing what he is wanting to reap and sell. So it's interesting that this has come up in this conversation as well. I suppose you would agree with Gareth on the small farmer option here. Yes,
I would. I just would like to add that in Africa, and we consult fairly widely in Africa, it is skills is a big issue. So what typically works in other African countries, and in South Africa to an extent as well, is an outgrower scheme, where that outgrower basically forms the center pivot, if I can use the agriculture.
What is an outgrower?
You have a nucleus farmer, and a lot of smallholder farmers around him.
Okay.
And these smallholder farmers feeds this nucleus farmer, so to speak, with their product. So he buys their maize from them, and he then sells all his maize to the off-taker.
Okay.
And in that process, you can impart skills and knowledge, because they would typically look at what he's doing, when he's planting, what kind of seeds he's using, etc. And if you can get that mix right, it's a very successful formula, and it could be very successful. With regards to the franchising, I really think it's a good idea, especially if you look at land reform and what's happening in this country with the recapitalization programs and the challenges there. One of the big challenges is typically if you want produce, you need to have security of supply, because you have guys down the line waiting for the produce. So in order to manage that with small farmers, I think is a challenge. But probably one of the biggest challenges is to basically get their skills to a level where they can be really productive.
Gareth, just very quickly here, because we're going to go into a break in just a moment. But in your opinion, do you still see, and I'm talking from an investment point of view here, is there still some margin to be made in maize futures and soybean futures, even at these high levels?
No, look, I think the maize guys will be quite excited about the situation, and then obviously will be upside for those particular individuals or people who want to get into it, because I don't foresee that the rising prices is going to end soon. I think the cycle is going to need to work its way out, over probably a period of 18 months to 2 years, and I don't foresee that price is going to dramatically drop during that particular time frame. So yes, there would obviously be upside as that demand, drives the price, up going forward, because human consumption is only going to increase. Food production still only needs to increase, and I think if you look at those factors and if you look at those trends, it would indicate that grain price is not going to, come down. More than likely going to go up going forward.
Okay. We'll come back to this, because there are a whole lot of other things that I want to look at from a food security point of view in southern and in Africa as a continent, but concentrating on southern Africa as well. Our guests will be with us in just a moment. Make sure you're back with us then as well.